Let's talk about Argentina. And oh my God, you heard the news earlier this year, earlier this month. It was announced that Trump was giving Argentina $20 billion, and then we found out it wasn't just 20; it's 40 billion. And what the hell? Why is Trump bailing out Argentina? Then we find out, because of this trade war with China, our soybean farmers can't export any soybeans. Although supposedly Trump has fixed that in his meetings with Xi just recently. But you know who's picked up the slack are Argentinian soybean farmers, and they're the ones that are selling all the soybeans into China, which is further screwing over our farmers, and people are angry. And at the same time, while $40 billion is being shipped out to Argentina, we've got SNAP benefits, food stamps are going to be cut because of the government shutdown. We've got this whole business about apparently health insurance rates are about to skyrocket because they're not, because of the government shutdown and everything that's going on. And now suddenly a lot of my friends on the left are turning into America first. They're saying, hey, we need to prioritize America, not Argentina. What the hell are you doing with Argentina? And meanwhile, my friends on the left don't really like Javier Milei, who is the president of Argentina, who is sort of Trump-ish in some ways, certainly when it comes to his hair and kind of his bombastic presentation on stage. But their political philosophy and agendas are extraordinarily different, near opposites. And I'm going to break down a little bit of that as we go into this. But meanwhile, my friends on the right, they're not necessarily supportive of this because, my friends on the right claim to be for America first, but they know that there's this crazy guy down in Argentina and they're probably cheering him on, and they just sort of shrug it off like 40 billion Argentina, whatever. All they care about are like deporting the illegals and, a number of other kind of the MAGA agenda. So I want to just share my own thoughts and opinions on this Argentinian story because Javier Milei, the president of Argentina, is a libertarian. He's from the Austrian School of Economics. He's a Mises guy. In many ways, he's aligned for a lot of policies on how I shape and see the world. And for me, this guy is a breath of fresh air. It's like, oh my God, we finally have a guy that's like, he's a legitimate, he's an economist. So he's bringing sound economic theory to solving a terrible economic crisis in Argentina. And people are saying, well, wait a minute, this is a bailout. But it's not really a bailout. It's different than a bailout. Now, if Argentina was running this insane budget deficit like we do in America, and they needed us to throw some cash their way to bail out the government budget, then you could say, okay, that's a bailout. Okay. But this is a little different. What they're doing is they're providing cash for a currency swap to prop up the economy. Now, there's some interesting background into this, but before I explain why they're doing the currency swap, let me explain to you what's been going on in Argentina. Going backwards like 100 years, Argentina was one of the richest countries in the Western Hemisphere. I mean, certainly US won, but Argentina was pretty close number 2 100 years ago. But over time, they have lost a great deal of wealth, of pride in Argentina. We've seen inflation to like crazy, unfathomable amounts of inflation, like over 200% a year, which is just mind-blowing. We're seeing all kinds of just really terrible conditions in Argentina because of Peronist policies. Don't cry for me, Argentina, Peron. And that regime, which, eventually went on to, I guess, the wife, et cetera. Those policies have destroyed Argentina. And that's why they are in such dire circumstances economically. And frankly, those dire circumstances is what's sort of opened the door for a political outsider like Milei to get in. Not only a political outsider, but a guy that had answers to these questions and was basically calling out the Peronists and a lot of the left-wing folks for their disaster policies. But Argentina has made massive progress. I think it's important to understand that. In October of 2024, Argentina had a 20% per month inflation rate. I mean, so that's like, if you extrapolate that, that would be well over, it'd be 240% a year if it was consistent for 12 months, right? I mean, we're complaining when, inflation rates get up to 7 or 8%. I mean, during the peak COVID for a while, it got just like a little bit above 10%. And we were going crazy here in America. Imagine if the problem over there, it's like, I mean, it's incredible. It's like 30, 40, 50 times worse than in America. But he has brought in 1 year, inflation in October of 2024 was 20%. In October of 2025, it was 2% in 1 month, which projects out to 24% per year, which still ain't good. On an annualized basis, I know the Federal Reserve here in America would like inflation to be around 2%, which they say kind of matches sort of population growth and, being the normal growth rate for an economy, and inflation should sort of match that, to optimize economic output and optimize employment. I don't know. Is 2% the right number? I know central planners, I often don't get it right. But the point is that Argentina's inflation rate has fallen off a cliff, and it still needs to fall further, but he's made great progress because of Milei's policies. He's deregulated the economy. He's eliminated import licenses. He's made it easier for companies to import products into Argentina. What are we doing in America? We're doing the opposite. We're making it harder to import goods into America, and certainly more expensive with tariffs. And he's lifting price controls. He even removed a lot of rent control and other rent regulations in Buenos Aires, and saw a radical decline in the cost of housing, especially for renters. I mean, because what he did is, since he deregulated the housing market, that in effect made a lot of housing units that previously were ineligible to be rented now suddenly could be rented, or rented in new and innovative ways, to transform a single family home into a 4-unit apartment building or whatever it is. Providing a lot more of that supply of housing on the market radically decreased rent. So another big plus, big feather in the cap of Argentina. They've attracted foreign investment there, increasing economic activity. They've reduced poverty as well. Now, it used to be a shocking, oh my God, 52.9% of the population in Argentina prior to Javier Milei becoming president, 52.9% were in poverty. Now it's only 40%, but that's still positive progress. That means more and more people are being lifted out of poverty. Now, granted, they're going through a transformation, because they're trying to control inflation. It's kind of wreaking havoc in the job market. It's like one step back to take 2 steps forward. But they're already seeing a lot of the positive results of this. But it's a rocky transition, as any sort of a climb out tends to be. But I think it's important to understand that. Now, what was the money for? The initial $20 billion, as I understand it, was a currency swap, which meant that, I don't know if it was the United States government or the International Monetary Fund, I think it might have been the IMF, took $20 billion and gave it to Argentina because the value of the Argentina peso had been falling. And the reason it had been falling is because investors in Argentina began to lose confidence in Javier Milei, because in a small district that was meant to be a canary in the coal mine for the Argentinian elections that just occurred last week, that they thought it was a signal that the people had found disfavor with Milei. And they thought that the economy in Argentina, as a result, because they were going to abandon Milei, were going to have more trouble, and they started pulling out. And so what Trump did, I think, in association with the IMF, is provided $20 billion in cash. They essentially provided dollars in exchange for pesos, which in Argentina, dollars are in high demand, pesos in lower demand. So they are bringing up the value of the peso, and as a result, they're providing sort of a presentation or evidence of value creation in Argentina while they're going through this crisis, in order to keep investors connected, because they have been spooked by the Peronists. Okay. And then it turned into another $20 billion, this time apparently from private funds, that's my understanding, not necessarily from taxpayer dollars, but from other investors. But ultimately, I think you have to understand that from Trump's point of view, this is more about taking care of American investors who had money kind of, in that Argentinian economy. And if Javier Milei lost, they were likely going to lose their butt. So he was trying to prop up Milei, but with the ultimate end goal of propping up his friends and his those he's connected to that have large investments in Argentina. And sure, there's a geopolitical strategy here going on, because you can see Trump sort of pivoting towards a Latin American or maybe a Western Hemisphere strategy for America, which that's a topic for a whole another podcast, because we have been, kind of at odds with Russia and China. Now, it seems that Trump's position on those two countries, obviously on Russia, is very different. On China, we're starting to see what's happening. But I'm wondering if he's going to take his focus off of those two foes and then shift his focus to the whole Western Hemisphere. We'll see about that. But at any rate, that's part of the strategy here with Trump. I mean, he's trying to satisfy investor friends. He's trying to, pursue a geopolitical strategy. But our left-wing friends, by the way, are just freaking out because of what's happening with SNAP and what's happening with the Affordable Care Act. Now, I'll just say this. There is, I'll say this is a message to my left-wing friends who are just mortified that SNAP is about to be defunded, that healthcare insurance premiums are about to significantly increase. I don't know. I've heard double, triple. I've heard all kinds of Armageddon numbers on this. Yeah, I mean, that's true. That's probably what's going to happen if they don't resolve the shutdown. And those idiots in Congress need to get together and resolve the shutdown. And by the way, the Republicans have the majority in both houses. And so really, they have the power. They can resolve this thing. But at the same time, the Democrats claim that they want to, cooperate and compromise. But then here they're not compromising. It's just a bunch of childish games. But if they get this thing together, there's the federal budget spending is $7 trillion a year. There's plenty of money for SNAP. There's plenty of money to subsidize healthcare premiums if that's the policy you want to pursue. It's just that they're spending it on other things that they deem a higher priority. So, and they also like to save these things as sort of political footballs that they can banty about and get everyone else into a tizzy. So I guess my summary statement of here is that the quote bailout of Argentina. Okay. Number one, it wasn't a bailout of, the budget. You could say, was it a bailout for investors? Yeah, probably that's what it was. Is there a geopolitical strategy behind this? Yeah. Do I support it? No. I like Javier Milei, but I'm not a fan, certainly not a fan of taxpayer dollars going over for foreign aid, especially to prop up a currency. As much as I like Javier Milei to succeed, I wouldn't approve of taxpayer dollars going. But if it's IMF dollars or private money going, I don't necessarily have a problem with that unless someone can present evidence to me that says that would be damaging. But I think there's a lot of misinformation about what's really happening in Argentina. The summary statement is A, yeah, there's $40 billion going. B, it's there to basically protect investors, essentially, American investors in many cases. And number three, Argentina is doing extraordinarily well compared to where they were a year ago. They're making great progress. And if this trajectory continues, it could turn into a really big success story. And not only a success story overall, but really a model of the benefit of free market economics and how it can make not only the rich richer, but it can bring the poor out of poverty. And so we're going to see a lot more from this as we go. Okay, enough of Argentina.